Cirrus Vaughn had dreamed of the stars since she was a hatchling. And now, as she stepped aboard the galactic survey vessel Infinite Horizon for the first time, her 3 hearts beat so fast she thought they might burst from her chest. The ship was massive, stretching nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, and it carried the most advanced mapping technology in all of Council space. This was where the galaxy's greatest cartographers worked, and somehow she had earned a place among them. Her scales shimmered with nervous energy as she made her way through the corridors, passing crew members from a dozen different species, who barely glanced at the young Valkyrie female, clutching her assignment tablet like it was a sacred relic. Commander Grell was waiting for her in the primary mapping chamber, his massive Torvian frame blocking most of the doorway as his 4 eyes studied her with what she hoped was approval rather than disappointment. "You are the new one," he said, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. "The Academy says you have talent. But talent means nothing out here without discipline and respect for the rules we follow." Cirrus nodded quickly, afraid to speak and say something foolish on her very first day. The mapping chamber took her breath away. Holographic star charts filled the enormous room. Billions of points of light representing systems that had been catalogued over thousands of years by countless cartographers who came before her. She walked among the floating lights like a child in a dream, reaching out to touch a nearby star cluster and watching the data bloom around her fingers. "Beautiful, is it not?" Grell said, and for a moment his gruff voice carried something that sounded almost like warmth. "This is the collected knowledge of 100 civilizations, the map of everything we know." Cirrus spent her first week learning the systems, studying the protocols, and trying to memorize the locations of the 17 different refreshment stations on her deck alone. The Infinite Horizon was less like a ship and more like a flying city, and she got lost at least 3 times every day, but she was happier than she had ever been, because she was finally doing what she was born to do. It was on the 8th day that she noticed the anomaly. She had been reviewing standard galactic charts, comparing older versions to newer ones as part of her training exercises, when she spotted something strange. There was a region of space, quite large actually, that appeared on every single map she examined, but it was not mapped. Instead of stars and systems and trade routes, there was simply a blank space marked with 2 words that sent a chill down her spine for reasons she could not explain. "Boundary do not chart." Cirrus checked another map, and another still, and every single one showed the same thing. This void existed on Valkyrie maps and Torvian maps, and even the ancient charts created by the Etherians themselves, who had been traveling the stars when most species were still learning to make fire. She found Commander Grell in his office, his 4 eyes focused on a data tablet as she knocked nervously on the doorframe. "Commander, I have a question about the standard charts," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "There's a region that appears unmapped on every version I have examined, and I was wondering if perhaps we had plans to survey it." Grell looked up, and something changed in his face. His eyes, which had been merely stern before, now carried an emotion she had never seen in him. It looked like fear. "What region?" he asked, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer. "The one marked as boundary do not chart," Cirrus said. "It is quite large, actually, and I thought perhaps it was a clerical error, or that is human space," Grell interrupted, and his voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. "We do not go there, we do not map there, and we do not ask about it. Do you understand me, young one?" Cirrus blinked in confusion, because she had never heard of humans before, and surely any species significant enough to claim such a vast region of space would be mentioned in basic education. "I am sorry, Commander, but I do not understand," she said carefully. "Who are the humans, and why is their space forbidden to chart?" Grell stood up so quickly that his chair crashed to the floor behind him. And for a terrible moment, Cirrus thought he might strike her. Instead, he simply stood there, breathing heavily, his four eyes darting around the room as if checking for unseen listeners. "You will never ask that question again," he said. And his voice shook in a way that made Cirrus's scales turn pale with shock. "You will never speak of humans on this ship or any other. You will never attempt to research them or contact them or even think about them if you can help it. This is not a request or a suggestion. This is the only warning I will give you." He stepped closer, and Cirrus could see that his hands were trembling. Every species in this galaxy knows better than to ask why the map ends where it does. He continued, "The Torvians know, the Etherians know, even the Kreesh, who fear nothing and no one know. We have known for 3,000 years, and we will know for 3,000 more. And you will not be the one who forgets." Cirrus left his office in a daze, her mind spinning with questions she had just been forbidden to ask. What could possibly frighten a Torvian, a species renowned across the galaxy for their courage in battle and their stubborn refusal to back down from any challenge? She tried to put it out of her mind. She really did, but curiosity was the very essence of what made her want to be a cartographer in the first place. And telling her not to ask was like telling her not to breathe. Over the following days, she began to notice things she had missed before. The way conversations would stop suddenly if anyone accidentally mentioned the boundary region. The way older crew members would make strange gestures with their hands as if warding off evil spirits. The way even the ship's AI systems seemed to have been programmed to redirect any queries about that forbidden space. It was not just the infinite horizon. She realized it was everywhere. Everyone, every species she could think of. And then she found the fragment. It was buried deep in the archives, a corrupted data file that the system had failed to properly delete. Most of it was unreadable, damaged beyond recovery. But a few pieces remained intact. What she found made her blood run cold. The file contained partial records of a Velthari exploration fleet, a name she did not recognize from any history she had ever studied. The fleet had consisted of 40,000 ships and millions of crew members, and according to the fragment, they had crossed into human space exactly 2,847 years ago. There was no record of them ever coming back. There was no record of the Velthari existing at all, except for this single corrupted fragment that had somehow survived whatever had erased everything. Elsisaurus sat alone in the dark archive room, staring at the data on her screen, and she understood for the first time why Commander Grell had been so afraid something had happened 3,000 years ago. Something so terrible that an entire galaxy had chosen to forget it. And she had just found the only proof that it had ever occurred at all. She should delete the file and walk away and never think about it again, just as Grell had told her to do. But she was a cartographer, and cartographers did not leave blank spaces on maps. She copied the fragment to her personal tablet and began to plan her next move. Knowing that she was about to cross a line that no one had crossed in 3 millennia, the question was not whether she would find answers. The question was whether she would survive them. Cirrus spent the next 3 months conducting the most careful and secretive investigation of her entire life. And what she discovered shook her understanding of galactic history to its very core. She had to be clever about it. Searching archives during off hours, asking questions that seemed innocent, piecing together fragments of information that others had either overlooked or deliberately ignored. The more she dug, the more she found a pattern that sent chills running through her body every single time. There was a period in galactic history, roughly 3,000 years ago, that scholars simply called the Quiet Years. It was described in textbooks as a time of peace and consolidation, a natural pause between eras of expansion. Nothing unusual and certainly nothing worth investigating further. But Cirrus was a cartographer. trained to notice what was missing from maps. And she could see clearly now that something enormous had been erased from the historical record. She called it the Hollow Generation during those years. Medical facilities across dozens of worlds reported unexplained cases of psychological trauma. Entire populations experienced nightmares, depression, and a strange sense of loss that no one could explain. Therapy centers were overwhelmed. Suicide rates increased dramatically. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. People simply chose not to talk about it anymore, not to think about it, not to remember, and they had been not remembering for 3,000 years. The Volturi fragment haunted her dreams. 40,000 ships, millions of lives, an entire civilization that had apparently existed and then simply did not exist anymore. She needed to find someone who actually remembered what had happened. Someone old enough to have lived through the Hollow Generation. And there was only one species in the galaxy whose members could live that long. The Etherians were ancient beyond comprehension. Crystalline beings of living light who had traveled between stars when other species were. Still single-celled organisms floating in primordial oceans. Most of them had long ago retreated from galactic affairs, finding the concerns of younger species too brief and too chaotic to warrant their attention. But Cirrus had found references to one who still remained. His name was Elder Morath, and he lived alone on a dying moon at the very edge of Council space, as far from human space as it was possible to get while still remaining in known territory. Getting there took Cirrus 2 weeks of travel and used up nearly all of her saved credits. But she did not care. She needed answers, and this ancient being was her only hope of finding them. The moon was gray and lifeless, its atmosphere thin and cold, and the only structure on its surface was a simple dwelling carved into the rock itself. Saurus landed her small rented shuttle and made her way to the entrance, where she found a door that had clearly not been opened in decades. She knocked, and waited, and knocked again. "Go away," came a voice from within, soft and musical despite its obvious exhaustion. "I do not receive visitors. I do not answer questions. And I do not wish to remember anything that you have come to ask about." Cirrus pressed her hand against the cold stone of the door. "Please," she said. "I found a fragment, a record of the Volturi, and I need to understand what happened. I need to know why the map ends at human space." The silence that followed lasted so long that Cirrus began to think the Elder had simply decided to ignore her completely. But then the door opened. Elder Morath was beautiful in the way that ancient things often are. His form a shifting pattern of lights contained within a vaguely humanoid crystal structure. His colors were muted now, pale blues and fading whites. Nothing like the brilliant displays that Etherians were known for. "You found a fragment," he repeated, and something in his voice broke slightly on the words. "After all this time, something remained. I had hoped we had destroyed it all." He led her inside, to a chamber lit only by his own soft glow, and gestured for her to sit on a stone bench worn smooth by thousands of years of use. "I will tell you what you wish to know," he said, "because you have already gone too far to turn back, and because perhaps it is time that someone remembered. But I warn you, young cartographer, that knowledge is not always a gift." Cirrus nodded, her 3 hearts pounding with anticipation and fear in equal measure. "The Volturi were real," Morris began, and as he spoke his light flickered with colors she had never seen before. Colors that seemed to carry emotions too complex for her to name. They were a proud species, powerful and ambitious, and they controlled a significant portion of what is now empty space beyond the boundary. 3,000 years ago, the Volturi discovered a new species on a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. These creatures called themselves humans, and they had only just begun to reach beyond their own world. His light pulsed with something that looked almost like grief. The Volturi decided that the humans were too primitive to be worth proper contact. but too numerous to be ignored. They chose to collect them, to study them, to contain them before they could spread across the galaxy, like the vermin the Velthari believed them to be. They arrived with their fleet of 40,000 ships, ready to conquer a species that had barely mastered basic space travel. Expecting an easy victory against creatures they considered little more than clever animals. Cirrus leaned forward, hardly daring to breathe. What happened? Elder Marth was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight of memory that seemed almost too heavy to bear. The humans responded with something none of us understood, he said. Something we still cannot name. Something that defies every law of physics and reality that we have ever known. The Velthari tried to make the humans not exist. They used weapons of reality itself, technologies that could rewrite the fundamental nature of space and time, tools that had already unmade dozens of species throughout galactic history. They failed. Not only did they fail, but the humans reflected their attack back upon them. In a single instant, the Velthari were not merely destroyed, they were unmade, erased from existence so completely that even the memory of them faded from the minds of everyone who had ever known them. Cirrus felt her scales turn pale with horror. 40,000 ships, Morath continued, his light flickering erratically now. Billions of souls, 6 colony worlds. Thousands of years of history and culture and art and science. All of it gone, not destroyed, but simply never having existed in the first place. The only reason any fragments remain at all is because humans remembered them. Humans had observed them, had been aware of them, and human memories cannot be unwritten. I do not understand, Cirrus whispered. How is such a thing possible? We do not know, Morath admitted. We have theories, guesses, desperate attempts to explain the unexplainable. But the truth is that humans simply are different from every other form of consciousness in the galaxy. We exist as patterns of probability, quantum fluctuations that coalesced into awareness. We can be predicted, modeled, and ultimately unmade by sufficiently advanced manipulation of reality. Humans cannot. Human consciousness is fixed, absolute, an anchor point in a universe of endless possibility. They are not merely alive. They are permanent in a way that nothing else is. His light dimmed almost to nothing when 15 different species across hundreds of light years learned what had happened to the Velthari. We all made the same choice independently and simultaneously. We decided to forget, to never speak of humans again, to pretend that the boundaries simply did not exist, not because we feared their weapons, young one, but because we feared what it meant to be known by them. Cirrus sat in silence, trying to process everything she had heard, knowing that her understanding of reality had just been shattered and rebuilt into something far stranger and more terrifying. They are aware of you now. You know, Morath said softly. They always know when someone is watching, when someone is remembering, when someone is asking questions that others have long since learned never to ask. You have drawn their attention, and now you must decide whether you are brave enough to learn why the galaxy chose to forget. Cirrus looked at the ancient Etherean, at the grief and fear and strange hope that flickered through his crystalline form. And she knew that there was only one choice she could make. She had to know the truth, whatever the cost. Cirrus returned from the dying moon with her mind full of terrible knowledge and her heart heavy with the weight of understanding. But she had barely set foot on the nearest space station before she received a message that changed everything. The Galactic Concord wished to speak with her. The Concord was the highest authority in all of Council space, a gathering of the 12 most powerful species in the known galaxy. And they did not summon young cartographers for casual conversation. Cirrus knew that her investigation had been discovered, and she expected to face punishment or perhaps worse. Instead, when she arrived at the great circular chamber where the Concord held its meetings. She found something she had not anticipated: fear. The 12 representatives sat in their appointed places around the massive table, beings of such power and influence that their decisions shaped the fate of billions. And every single one of them looked at her with eyes that carried not anger but desperation. "You have been asking questions," said the Torvian representative, a female even larger than Commander Grell. "You have been digging through archives that were meant to remain buried, speaking with those who were meant to remain forgotten." "Yes," Cirrus admitted, "because there was no point in denying what they obviously already knew. And you learned the truth about human space," the Etherian representative added, its light pulsing with colors that might have been anxiety or anticipation or both. "I did." The chamber fell silent, and the 12 representatives exchanged glances that spoke of centuries of shared secrets and collective denial. It was the Krish representative who finally broke the silence, its insectoid mandibles clicking with barely contained tension. "We did not summon you here for punishment, young Valkyrie," it said. "We summoned you because we need your help." Cirrus stared in disbelief. "My help?" The Torvian representative leaned forward, her massive claws gripping the edge of the table. "Human space has been expanding," she said, and the words seemed to cost her great effort to speak, slowly, quietly, so gradually that we almost did not notice until it was too late. 3 star systems in the last century have been absorbed into the boundary. There was no invasion, no conquest, no war. The stars simply became part of human space, and all records of what existed there before faded from memory. We only know this because we have been watching the boundary obsessively for 3,000 years, counting the stars along its edge, checking and rechecking to make sure nothing changed. But it has changed, and it continues to change. And we do not know why. The Etherian representative's light flickered with something that looked almost like shame. For 3 millennia, we have maintained our silence, believing that if we simply ignored the humans, they would ignore us in return. We were wrong, or perhaps we were right and something has changed. But either way, we can no longer afford to remain ignorant. We need someone to make contact. Cirrus felt her 3 hearts skip several beats. "You want me to go to human space," she said, hardly believing what she was hearing. "You have already drawn their attention," the Krish representative replied. "You have already broken the silence that we maintained for so long. If anyone is going to cross that boundary, it might as well be someone who is already committed to learning the truth. We cannot send a fleet, for that might be seen as aggression. We cannot send a diplomat, for we have no diplomatic relations to build upon. We cannot send a scientist, for we do not even know what questions to ask. But we can send a cartographer, someone whose only purpose is to observe and record, someone who might be seen as curious rather than threatening." The Torvian representative slid a data chip across the table toward Cirrus. "This contains everything we know about the boundary, every observation we have made over 3,000 years, every scrap of information we have gathered while pretending not to gather anything at all. It also contains the coordinates of the nearest crossing point, a place where the boundary is thin enough that a small vessel might pass through without being destroyed. We are asking you to do what no one has done in 3 millennia, she concluded. We are asking you to speak to the humans and find out why they are growing." Cirrus took the data chip with trembling hands, understanding that she was being given both an honor and a death sentence. "Possibly both at the same time. And if I refuse," she asked, "then we will find someone else," the Etherian representative said simply. "But we believe you will not refuse, because you have already proven that you cannot resist the need to know what lies in the blank spaces of the map." They were right. Of course. She could not refuse, not after everything she had learned. Not after coming so far 2 weeks later. Cirrus sat alone in a small survey vessel at the edge of the boundary, staring at the vast emptiness that stretched before her and trying to convince herself that she was brave enough to cross it. The ship was basic, almost primitive by galactic standards, equipped with nothing that could be mistaken for a weapon and carrying no crew besides herself. The Concorde had insisted on this, believing that simplicity might be seen as honesty. She took a deep breath, whispered a prayer to whatever gods might be listening, and engaged her engines. The boundary hit her like a wall. Every instrument on her ship went dark simultaneously. The hum of the engines faded to silence, and even the emergency lighting flickered and died. She was floating in absolute darkness, unable to see anything, unable to hear anything, unable to do anything except wait. She waited for 3 days. During that time, she experienced no hunger, no thirst, no need for sleep. It was as if time itself had stopped, or perhaps as if she had stepped outside of time, entirely into some space between moments where nothing existed except her own thoughts. On the 3rd day, light returned. A ship appeared beside her own, small and almost crude in its design. Nothing like the elegant vessels that the Council species used. It looked like something a child might build from spare parts. Functional, but without any concern for aesthetics. A docking tube extended from the strange ship to her own, and Cirrus heard the hiss of airlocks engaging them. The door opened, and she saw a human for the first time. The creature was smaller than she expected, bipedal and symmetrical, with soft skin and a shade of brown that reminded her of tree bark. It had 2 eyes, 1 nose, 1 mouth, and a covering of dark hair on its head. It was smiling. "Hello," the human said, and its voice was warm and friendly in a way that seemed completely at odds with everything Cirrus had learned about these terrifying beings. "My name is Captain Elena Vance, and I have been waiting for you." Cirrus tried to speak, but found that her voice had abandoned her. Lena stepped into the vessel and looked around with obvious curiosity, her eyes taking in every detail of the Volcari design before returning to focus on Cirrus herself. "You are the one who found the fragment," Elena said. "The one who spoke to Elder Morath. The one who convinced the Concorde to finally break their silence after 3,000 years of hiding. How do you know all of that?" Cirrus managed to whisper. Elena's smile widened. "We have been watching." "Of course. We always watch, we always listen, we always remember. It is what we are, what we have always been, what we will always be." She extended her hand, palm up, in what appeared to be a gesture of friendship. "You came here looking for answers, and I am prepared to give them to you. But I must warn you first that the truth is not what you expect. Understanding what we are means understanding what you are. And that knowledge is why the galaxy chose to forget." Cirrus looked at the human's hand, at the soft skin and delicate fingers that seemed so fragile compared to her own scaled claws. And she understood that this was the moment of decision. She could turn back now, return to the Concorde with a report of failure, and spend the rest of her life wondering what might have been, or she could take this human's hand and learn the truth that had terrified a galaxy for 3 millennia. She reached out and took Elena's hand. "Show me," she said. Elena's smile became something deeper, something ancient and knowing and impossibly kind. "Welcome to human space," she said. "We have so much to talk about." Elena guided her ship through human space with the casual confidence of someone who had made this journey 1,000 times before. And Cirrus watched through the viewport with growing amazement at everything she saw. She had expected fortresses, weapons platforms, massive defensive structures designed to protect the species that had terrified a galaxy. Instead, she saw garden space stations covered in growing plants, drifted between worlds that glowed with the soft light of healthy ecosystems. And everywhere she looked, there were signs of life thriving in harmony with the universe around it. "This is not what I expected," Cirrus admitted. Elena laughed softly. a sound that seemed to carry genuine warmth rather than mockery. "No one ever expects this," she said. "They expect monsters, weapons, armies ready to march across the stars and conquer everything in their path. They expect us to be terrifying because they have decided that we must be terrifying. But we are not conquerors, Cirrus. We never were." They approached a blue and green world that Elena called Old Earth, the original home of humanity. And as they descended through the atmosphere, Cirrus felt something she had never experienced before was a pressure, not physical, but something deeper. As if the very fabric of reality was thicker here, more substantial, more real than anywhere else she had ever been. "You feel it," Elena observed. "Everyone does when they first arrive. That sense of weight, of permanence, of being truly present in a way that you have never been before." "What is it?" Cirrus asked. "That is us," Elena said simply. "That is what humans are, and that is why the galaxy chose to forget." They landed in a green field surrounded by forests and mountains, and Elena led Cirrus to a simple building made of wood and stone that looked nothing like the gleaming structures that housed important meetings in council space inside. Several other humans were gathered around a table, eating food and talking and laughing as if they were not the most terrifying beings in the known universe. "Sit," Elena said, gesturing to an empty chair. "I promised you answers, and I will give them to you. But first, you need to understand something fundamental about the nature of reality." Cirrus sat, her scales rippling with nervous energy. "Every sapient species in the galaxy exists as patterns of probability," Elena began. "You are not solid in the way that rocks and water are solid. You are quantum fluctuations, possibilities that have temporarily coalesced into awareness. This is not a metaphor or a simplification. It is literal truth. Every thought you have, every memory you hold, every aspect of your existence is a probability wave that could theoretically be altered or erased by sufficiently advanced manipulation. The Valkyrie understood this better than most. They had developed technology that could rewrite probability itself, unmaking species by simply adjusting the equations of reality so that those species had never existed in the first place. They used this technology to eliminate dozens of civilizations that they considered threats, erasing them so completely that no one even remembered they had ever been. And then they tried to use it on us." Elena paused, her expression becoming something harder and more ancient than her youthful face suggested. "They failed. Because humans are different. We do not exist as probability waves. We are not quantum fluctuations temporarily pretending to be conscious. We are fixed points in the fabric of reality, anchors around which everything else flows. No one knows why this is true. Perhaps it is something about the particular conditions under which consciousness evolved on our world. Or perhaps it is something deeper and stranger that we will never understand. But the fact remains that human consciousness cannot be altered, cannot be erased, cannot be made to have never existed. We are permanent in a way that nothing else in the universe is permanent." Cirrus felt her understanding of reality cracking and reforming around this revelation. "The Valkyrie tried to unmake you," she said slowly. "And instead they unmade themselves." "Exactly," Elena confirmed. "Their reality-altering weapons struck us and were reflected back upon them. The probability manipulation that was meant to erase humanity instead erased the Valkyrie, completely and permanently. But here is the part that truly terrified the galaxy. The only reason any evidence of the Valkyrie remains at all is because we remembered them. We had observed them, been aware of them, held them in our consciousness. And because human memory cannot be unwritten, the fragments of their existence that we remembered became permanent as well. That is why the galaxy chose to forget us, Cirrus. Not because they feared our weapons or our armies, but because they feared what it means to be remembered by us." Cirrus struggled to process this information. her mind racing through the implications. If humans remember something, it becomes permanent, she said. It cannot be erased, cannot be unmade, cannot be altered. Yes, and if humans forget something, it loses that protection. Also yes. So the galaxy has been hiding from you for 3,000 years because they are afraid of being remembered. Elena nodded. And something like sadness flickered across her face. They are afraid of permanence, she said. They are afraid of consequence. For 3 millennia, the other species have lived in a universe where mistakes could be undone, where atrocities could be erased, where nothing truly mattered because anything could be changed. If you had enough power and knowledge, they have destroyed civilizations and wiped the evidence from existence. They have committed horrors and then simply made those horrors never have happened. They have lived without accountability because accountability requires permanence. But if we remember them, that changes. If we watch them, observe them, hold them in our awareness, then their actions become fixed. Their crimes cannot be undone. Their achievements cannot be stolen. Their existence matters in a way that existence has never mattered before. That is why they hide. Not because they fear what we might do to them, but because they fear what they might do to themselves once they know we are watching. Cirrus sat in silence, feeling the weight of this knowledge settle into her bones. You are not monsters, she finally said. You are witnesses. Elena smiled, but there was grief in her eyes now. We are both, she admitted, because being a witness means holding on to everything. The beautiful and the terrible, the kind and the cruel. We remember the Velthuries' art and their music and their dreams. And we also remember what they tried to do to us. We remember every species that has ever come to our attention, every individual, every moment. We cannot forget, cannot choose to let go, cannot offer the mercy of oblivion. Some of your people would call that a gift. Others would call it a curse. I think it is simply what we are. Cirrus looked at the humans around her, at these ordinary-looking beings eating their simple food and living their quiet lives. And she understood why the galaxy had been so afraid. It was not fear of destruction. It was fear of judgment. It was fear of being seen clearly and remembered honestly, without the possibility of revision or excuse. It was fear of being real. The boundary is expanding, she said suddenly, remembering why the Concord had sent her. 3 systems in the last century have been absorbed into human space. Elena nodded. We have been reaching out, she said, gently, carefully, 1 star at a time. We watch those systems now. We remember them. We make them permanent, not through conquest, but through awareness. The galaxy cannot hide forever, Cirrus. Sooner or later, everything will be remembered. And then the real question will have to be answered. What question? Cirrus asked. Elena looked at her with eyes that seemed to contain depths of time that no mortal creature should possess. Are you brave enough to be real? Cirrus thought about the Concord, waiting anxiously for her report. She thought about Commander Grell and his fear. She thought about Elder Morath and his grief. She thought about all the species, across all the stars, who had chosen to hide rather than face the consequences of their own existence. And she made her choice. I think I am, she said. Cirrus returned to council space, carrying the weight of truth in her heart and the task of delivering it to those who had spent 3,000 years running from it. The journey back through the boundary was different this time. Instead of darkness and silence, she experienced a strange sense of being watched, of being held in awareness, of being remembered. It should have been terrifying, but somehow it felt like comfort. The Galactic Concord was waiting for her in the same circular chamber where they had sent her off on her mission. And the 12 representatives leaned forward with identical expressions of desperate hope and paralyzing fear. You survived, the Torvian representative said. and her voice carried a note of disbelief that suggested she had not expected this outcome. "I did more than survive," Cirrus replied. "I learned the truth, and now I am going to share it with you." She told them everything. She explained about probability waves and quantum consciousness, about fixed points and permanent memories, about witnesses and consequences. She described the beautiful garden worlds and the simple lives that humans lived. She recounted her conversation with Captain Elena Vance and the revelation that had shattered her understanding of reality when she finished. The chamber was silent. The Creche representative's mandibles clicked nervously as it processed the information. The Etherian's light had dimmed to almost nothing. The Torvian's claws had gouged deep scratches into the surface of the table. "They are not weapons," Cirrus concluded. "They are not conquerors or destroyers or any of the things we feared they might be. They are witnesses, and we have been hiding from them because we are afraid of being seen. We have lived for 3,000 years without accountability, committing atrocities and erasing them, destroying civilizations and forgetting their names. And we chose to forget humanity because remembering them meant facing the possibility that our own actions might someday matter." The Torvian representative stood up, her massive form trembling with emotion. "You expect us to simply accept this?" she demanded. "To believe that the solution to 3 millennia of terror is to stop hiding and let these creatures watch us?" "I expect you to recognize the truth when you hear it," Cirrus replied calmly. "And I expect you to understand that you cannot hide forever. Human space is expanding, not through conquest but through awareness. Sooner or later, they will remember all of us. And then we will have to face the consequences of everything we have done while we thought no one was watching. The only choice we have is whether we face that moment on our own terms or wait until it is forced upon us." The chamber erupted into chaos as representatives argued and shouted and accused each other of cowardice and foolishness. Some demanded that Cirrus be arrested for spreading dangerous ideas, while others insisted that she was right and they had no choice but to change. Cyrus watched them fight, feeling a strange sense of peace amid the turmoil. "I'm going back," she said quietly, and somehow her voice cut through the noise and silenced everyone. "I am going to return to human space and ask them to remember us. All of us, every species, every crime, every kindness, every moment of our existence. I'm going to ask them to make us permanent." The Etherian representative's light suddenly blazed with colors she had never seen before. Brilliant and fierce and somehow defiant. "I will go with you," it said. "I have lived too long carrying the weight of secrets that should have been spoken millennia ago. It is time for us to be real again." One by one, other representatives began to nod, their fear slowly transforming into something that looked almost like courage. The Creche was next, then the Torvian, then others whose names Cirrus did not even know. By the end, only 3 representatives remained opposed, and even they seemed more resigned than defiant. "Very well," the Torvian representative said finally. "We will make contact. We will open diplomatic relations. We will step out of the shadows and let the humans see us as we truly are. But if this goes wrong, if they decide to destroy us or unmake us or whatever terrible thing we have feared for so long, then you will be remembered as the one who brought doom upon the galaxy." Cirrus smiled, because she understood now that being remembered was not a threat but a gift. "If that happens," she said, "then at least we will be remembered, and that is more than we could say before." The months that followed were the most chaotic and transformative in galactic history. Trade routes opened between Council space and human space for the first time in 3 millennia. Diplomatic delegations traveled in both directions. Nervous aliens meeting curious humans who seemed genuinely delighted to finally have neighbors. The galactic map was redrawn, with human space no longer marked as a void, but as a fully charted region, connected to everything else by lines of commerce and communication, and something strange began to happen to the species who made contact. They began to feel more real. The Kreesh reported that their soldiers were sleeping better, that the nightmares that had plagued their species for thousands of years were finally fading. The Etherians said that their light was brighter now, more vibrant, more alive than it had been in memory. Even the Torvians, stubborn and proud as they were, admitted that there was a sense of weight to their existence now, a feeling of mattering that they had never experienced before. It was not comfortable, not always. Being remembered meant being accountable, and there were species who had to face the consequences of actions they had long since erased from their own records. But it was also liberating, because for the first time in 3,000 years, existence meant something. Xeris was present on old Earth when the first official delegation from the Galactic Concord arrived, standing beside Captain Elena Vance as the representatives descended from their ships and stepped onto human soil. The Torvian representative looked around at the green fields and blue skies and simple wooden buildings, and her 4 eyes were wet with tears that her species was not supposed to be able to produce. "It is beautiful," she said. "I never imagined that the place we feared most in the universe would be so beautiful." Elena smiled and extended her hand in greeting. "Welcome to permanence," she said. "We've been keeping your seat warm." The Torvian took her hand, and something shifted in the fabric of reality. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but Xeris felt it. The moment when the Torvian species became fixed, permanent, real in a way they had never been before. One by one, the other representatives followed, each of them making contact with humanity, and each of them becoming anchored to existence in the process. When it was done, Elena looked at Xeris with eyes that carried both joy and a hint of something that might have been gratitude. "Thank you," she said, "for being brave enough to ask the question that no one else would ask." Xeris shook her head. "Thank you," she replied, "for being patient enough to wait 3,000 years for someone to finally ask it." She looked up at the sky, at the stars that were now fully charted for the first time in recorded history, and she thought about all the blank spaces that remained in the universe, all the questions that still needed answers. But that was the joy of being a cartographer. She realized there would always be more to discover, more to map, more to remember, and now, thanks to humanity, all of it would matter. The last entry in Xeris's official report to the Galactic Concord was simple, but it would be remembered for thousands of years to come. "The galactic map no longer ends at human space," she wrote. "It begins there, and for the first time in 3 millennia, we are finally real." Captain Elena Vance stood alone on a hill overlooking the landing field as the alien delegation departed, watching their ships rise into the sky and scatter towards stars that now knew they were being watched. She had waited so long for this moment, for someone to finally be curious enough and brave enough to break through the wall of fear that had separated humanity from the rest of the galaxy. And now that wall was gone, replaced by something far more important: connection. She smiled as she watched the last ship disappear into the clouds, and she spoke words that no one else could hear. "Welcome to the family," she said. "All of you. We promise to remember."